O'Neill, ensuring that from an asphalt point of view, he's waving his hands at us and waving his hands at everyone to say, don't forget about me.
Yes, exactly. You feel that Danny Holgado was coming into this weekend with something of a point to prove after what happened on the other side of the box so spectacularly 2 weeks ago in Hungary. The first Hungarian GP since 1992 was a day that we'll never forget for the first victory in this class for a certain David Alonso, and Danny Holgado field is coming into this weekend thinking, hey, I am capable of doing the same. Sure, he will have to come up against some stiff competition, namely this rider here. René Gonzalez was looking strong, as he always does on a Friday morning in Moto2 in 2025. Third fastest time from the championship leader. He was looking in decent shape, albeit over a tenth of a second back of the rookie. But fresh from confirming that he'll be staying put in the intact GP squad for next year. René Gonzalez, third fastest, one place ahead of this rider.
Arenas brandishing a special helmet design for his home Grand Prix. Trying to read the graffiti style lettering on his helmet there. Well, prejudge or guess what it says on there. Handwriting perhaps even more difficult to understand than my own there on the crash helmet of Arenas, but there's clearly a story behind that, which I'm sure he'll explain later on. A strong start to the weekend, as Neil mentioned, for the home hero, of which there are many across all three classes of Grand Prix racing. Fourth quickest for him earlier on, 2 places behind this man, who was fourth in the World Championship, but second in free practice 1. And already Barry Baltus peering this morning to get more of a tune out of his Spantic Calyx than he did at any stage 2 weeks ago in Hungary, when he had to go through qualifying 1. Succeeded in doing so, in fairness to him, but then qualified 15th on the grid, a result that he could only convert into 12th in the race, which is why he's now 57 points off the World Championship lead.
Yeah, Baltus keen to make amends here this weekend. Said he was feeling a little bit sick, a little unwell on the Saturday in Hungary, which went some way to explaining why he was so lacklustre in qualifying, down in 15th. But here is the man of the moment in the Moto2 category, David Alonso. We didn't see so much of him on screen earlier today. He had a slightly more relaxed morning than his teammate. Wasn't troubling the top names at any point in FP1, but he certainly was the last time we went racing. David Alonso, spectacular form, coming through from 11th at one point in that Hungarian GP to take his premier win in Moto2. Incredibly, his 19th win overall. There's not too many riders in this entire paddock that have 19 wins or more across all categories. And we're even talking about some off the top MotoGP riders, including the reigning world champion in that list. Quite incredible stuff, such was his record in the junior category. A good return to the action for this rider, Senna Agius. Good to see him back on Moto2 bike after he was absent in Hungary after that frightful collision on the first lap with Alonso Lopez. Very nearly got run over by Barry Baltus, who was just behind as well, but Senna is back here and showed that he's competitive on a track that has served him very well in the past. He was 9th at the start of play today.
We saw the track map there behind Senna Agius, just pinned onto the wall of his intact box with numbers on the outside of each of the corners, which I think were essentially denoting to him which gears he would be in each of those corners. There are a lot of 2s and 3s on that track map, which the bulk of the corners around this Catalan circuit are taken in. Colin Via, who we saw on screens immediately after him, arriving here in the best form of his Moto2 career so far, and not completely out of the Rookie of the Year conversation if he can continue that form for the rest of the season. Danny Holgado currently leads that particular chase on 87 points, 19 ahead of his teammate David Alonso. Alonso is in turn 26 ahead of Ivan Artola, who is then 10 ahead of Colin Via. It can only take one big result to suddenly completely transform that particular chase, which looks set to go all the way down to the final round in Valencia. Jake Dixon. The result at the end of this morning's session, perhaps not completely representative of how competitive Jake Dixon looked. There were a lot of fast improvers and big jumpers up the order in the latter stages of this morning's free practice 1 session. Jake Dixon, in fairness, was not among those as he slipped from top 3 for quite a lot of the session to an eventual 13th place. Q2 will be the minimum requirement for him this afternoon.
Yeah, we didn't see any late improvements from Jake, which made you wonder if he had spent the entirety of the first session of the weekend on the same tyres. Something to maybe ask him about later today. It was just a partial view of the lone American in this category. There is some local support from the grandstands. Joe Roberts, it was a full Americana flag there, wasn't it, with the bald eagle. Joe, who maybe been off the boil ever so slightly in the last couple of races. This should most certainly be more of a Joe Roberts track if the layout and indeed his track record here is to be believed. Roberts had a decent start to the day, nothing spectacular from his end. In fact, quite a disappointing start. I'll take that back. It was 24th position for Joe at the end of FP1, but we won't get overly excited about the times. I think this is a lot more of a clear indication of where everyone is at. We always love the first 10 or 15 minutes of this session, don't we, Lewis? Real opportunity for us to get a real grasp on who is looking strong and who isn't, who's a little off the boil, as we get to see on these longer runs just who is able to cut the faster pace. We're not necessarily expecting riders to be down in the low 1:42s in this session. The temperatures have obviously gone up quite considerably since this morning. I would say low 43s could potentially be some of the kind of the rhythm that we're seeing certainly in the first half of this session before everyone goes for all-out time attacks towards the end.
Yeah, certainly in terms of race pace, that sounds very realistic. 40 minutes of Moto2 practice, which, as we often see, is a little bit of a session of 3 parts. We sort of see the initial explosive lap times, which do occasionally decide who goes through to Q2. We have seen riders crash before getting a time attack in and still advance. We then have the relative dip as riders settle into sort of race rhythm and general Sunday preparation as they get set to go racing over 21 laps on Sunday afternoon. And then the mini qualifying session, almost a Q0 in the final 10 minutes or so of this practice session. As Aaron Canet is ready to commence his Friday afternoon victorious the last time he raced here. Final Grand Prix of last season, the Solidarity Grand Prix of Barcelona. And you could make an argument that's the last time he's genuinely looked like the reference point in Moto2, even if we have seen him right at the sharp end of this World Championship battle for so long. From the struggles he had in Hungary a couple of weeks ago when he had to go through Q1. The phrase home comforts definitely springs to mind, even if he is a Valencia boy, so his home Grand Prix is still to come this year. Aaron Canet arriving in a circuit which certainly would appear to be much more to his liking than Balton Park ever was.
Yeah, just as I was saying that Joe Roberts would probably be a little more suited to this layout than the 2 previous ones that we went to, which were very stop and start, stop and go, and difficult to build up much of a rhythm, much of a feel. This track certainly is different, even if the grip levels are fairly low. One of the probably standout tracks on this entire calendar, you would say, Lewis, for its grip properties and just how slippery it can get, especially in these hot afternoon temperatures that we have here in Catalunya. As it stands, we're just past 2 p.m. and we are experiencing something of an Indian summer in this part of the world. It has got very hot and quite humid again over the last 6 or 7 days or so. Not necessarily the most welcome of changes, I would have to say, but it is very hot here, and it's not necessarily who is the fastest name in these sessions that really is what to look out for. It is who can be the most consistent, and especially the most consistent with very, very used rubber, because like a couple of other tracks that we go to this year, this is all about tyre conservation, because you really do punish the right-hand side of the rear tyre on this circuit. I'm just about to see a bit of an example of it there from one of the Clint Forward factory racing bikes, but around turn 3, coming out of turn 4, you're on the edge of the right-hand side of the tyre for so long, and then of course we have to factor in turns 9, turns 12, 13 and 14, where you're going at quite a high speed, putting a lot of power to the ground through the right-hand side of that rear tyre, which obviously increases degradation quite considerably. So it It is about throttle control and how you can manage that here. That will be absolutely key across certainly MotoGP and Moto2 this weekend.
It's going to be one of those kind of Grand Prix where you need to kind of hold a manageable pace throughout. Going too fast too early in the Grand Prix could really come back to bite you in the backside. If you look back at last year, the best example that I was thinking of, and I just went and had a look at his lap times from last year's Grand Prix here, was Alonso Lopez, who plummeted down the order in the second half of the race. So for a bit of a snapshot of what we're talking about, Alonso Lopez in the first 6, 7, 8 laps of the Grand Prix was doing 1:43s as a race pace around here. By the end of the Grand Prix, his last 4 laps were in the 47s and the 48s. He was going 5 seconds a lap slower at the end of the Grand Prix than he was at the start. So that's a bit of a stark, I guess, demonstration, example for Moto2 as a collective, that if you don't treat your tyres with the due respect around a circuit such as this, you are in for some serious late race pain.
Yeah, that's a good example, Lewis. And it passed me by, Alonso Lopez's deterioration last year. I was thinking also of the previous year in 2023, Pedro Acosta's championship year in Moto2. He didn't get his qualifying nailed on at this circuit, and he really got quite excited to try and gain as many positions as possible in the first half of the race.
He did go for a softer rear tyre as well in that Grand Prix.
Yeah, he did end up catching the likes of Jake Dixon, Aaron Canet and Albert Arenas up at the front, as Arenas has a bit of a moment coming through that final turn. And you thought, wow, what a comeback this is from Acosta, but around 2/3 of the way through the race, it became very clear that he had eaten up way too much of his tyres. And yeah, the last 6, 7 laps were a real struggle for the Spaniard, who then went on to win the championship. But you could say that that particular Sunday afternoon was a little blemish on what was an otherwise near exemplary season, and it was just another indication of what can happen to you when you burn up those tyres too quickly here.
Well, the initial pace in this practice session is around about on par with what we saw first thing this morning in FP1. Daniel Holgado did a 1:42.306, the fastest lap of FP1. We've been essentially matching that now with Ifan Guevara on the Blue Crew Pramac Yamaha Bosca. He's your early leader on a 1:42.377. Senna Aegis is up in second place, also on a 42.3. But we'll get a good idea already in this session. Watch how quickly these lap times start to drop off as we go through this run. Already on the second batch of laps, no one's been able to get on par with Guevara's early time. Here he is, third rider in your picture, now second as he goes past the rider who's second to him in this session, Senna Aegis. Guevara, as we briefly touched upon this morning, grateful for the weekend off to allow his injured hand to rest and heal up after the crash on Friday in Austria, where he injured that hand, which had swollen up to the point where he could barely get the glove on that right hand. He was riding in absolute agony for much of the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, and decided that the pain wasn't really worth it once he'd essentially taken 3 trips through the long lap penalty bin. Let's ride on board then with the rider who currently sits second in the World Championship. This is Aaron Canet.
to be able to go on board with Aaron Canet as he made his way around this spectacular circuit. You just saw some of the massive undulations that we have here around this track, not even so visible on the TV cameras at the side of the track. It's only when you're trackside that you really appreciate just how far and how steep it is downhill from the last turn off this track down into turn 1, and then it rises back up towards turn 3 and turn 4 here again. You can see that Jake Dixon really was managing to put some decent ground, and Canet is losing big amounts of time on this run here. I think it was Albert Arenas who's managed to overtake him as well. So whatever it is, not quite working for the number 44, who still sits second in the championship despite a run of tricky results.
Very early stages in this practice session, only 9 minutes in, but at the moment Diogo Moreira's going in 22nd and Aaron Canet 24th. We've got fairly long odds on that being the state of play with half an hour of practice to go. Gavari, our current session leader, has come straight back up pit lane. His 142.377 currently leads the way, and you saw from the onboard there of some of the challenges and why it's particularly tough on tyres this circuit. Not only is it very abrasive, which on its own will take a lot out of the rubber, particularly at the rear, but corners such as this, where you're on the edge of the tyre for such a long time and you're feeding the throttle, trying to pick up the power up towards turn 4, you've got to be patient, but you can't afford to wait around for too long, otherwise you're going to lose time. So you're walking that sort of narrow tightrope between getting the best possible run through and out of turn 3, but not taking too much out of your rear tyre in the process.
That's absolutely right. That is the key to success here. As we go on board with Barry Baltus again, getting a bit of a tour of this track with the Fantic Racing riders. Baltus, his name had been linked to several other teams and seats across the Moto2 grid just around the summer break time. There was some talk of him potentially going to Italtrans. I think they were fairly keen for him to come across and replace the outgoing Diogo Moreira, who will step up into MotoGP next year. But it sounds as though Barry Baltus will be staying put in Fantic Racing next year. And with Tony Arbolino coming across from Pramac Racing, that could end up being a pretty handy little team aboard Calix Machinery for next year. They've already proven in 2025 that they can fight for the championship and compete regularly at the front of Moto2 races with Diogo Moreira. And with Baltus and Arbolino, those are two other names that should keep Fantic towards the front of Moto2 races next year.
And the key word from Tony Arbolino's point of view that you mentioned there was Calix. He hasn't particularly enjoyed his Boscoscuro adventure so far this season. I mean, it's clear that the Boscoscuro is a chassis that can be very, very competitive, but feels like it needs all the conditions, all the circumstances to be correct for it to do so. It needs the grip levels on the track to be absolutely perfect, not too high, as we have seen on occasions, particularly when we've ran the softest of the Pirelli tyre specifications, the SCX rear tyre, when that's been an advent of Moto2 Grand Prix. It's not particularly played to the strengths of the Boscoscuro, which does generate an awful lot of mechanical grip. It's a very, very good motorcycle in wet conditions, as Austin proved. But the Calix remains the best, most rounded motorcycle in Moto2, and it's clearly a bike that you can just put on any circuit, in any climate, any situation, anywhere in the world, and you know it's going to work. And Tony Arbolino's stint with the Blue Crew Pramac Boscoscuro squad felt like the die was cast right from pre-season testing, when he was complaining as loud as cared to mention that the chatter issues on board that bike were just really limiting his potential. And shy for a couple of outliers this season, the rain-affected Grand Prix in Austin and the Austrian Grand Prix where he came through to 5th place. We've not seen anything like the Tony Arbolino that pushed Pedro Acosta so hard for the World Championship 2 years ago.
Yeah, far from it. He has been a shadow of his former self in some ways this year, and slightly disconcerting to hear Tony and his team complaining yet again of issues with his right forearm after the race in Hungary just under 2 weeks ago. It was a decent start to the race, and Tony was saying that was probably the best part of the weekend, actually, those early laps, but he's been having issues on and off with arm pump in his right forearm throughout this season, and
there's no time at this stage of the season from now to Valencia to go get it operated on either.
Exactly, unless he wants to miss a big chunk of races, which I imagine he doesn't. So it's I have to be honest, I'm slightly surprised that they maybe didn't move a little sooner to try and put forth some kind of surgery to try and alleviate these issues. We have seen it, I mean, it's commonplace, isn't it, in Moto2? We've seen several riders have arm pump surgery after stepping up from the Moto3 class. And yeah, for Arbolino to be this advanced in the season after one or two opportunities over the summer to potentially go under the knife, it's slightly surprising to still hear him speaking of these issues that he was complaining of back in Argentina, I seem to remember, right at the start of the year.
Yeah, Argentina, he was complaining of the problems with his right arm. We also then saw him saying very similar things in Brno as well, when it wasn't just a problem with his bike that he was suffering from to finish down in 19th, but it was physical too. Brno was the last gone through before the summer break. Surely that would have been an opportune time to go under the surgeon's knife, but for whatever reason, and I'm sure he has his reasons, Tony Arbolino chose not to do so. And Arbolino, in this session at least, will be pretty happy with how life is going. Fourth at the moment. In fact, Boscoscuro as a whole, we're pretty pleased with how it's looking so far. Guevara fastest on the Boscoscuro, Salach and Arbolino third and fourth on board the Boscoscuro chassis, and Ivan Artola up in sixth place. So certainly in perhaps what might be slightly slippery and greasy conditions in the heat of this afternoon, that particular chassis is working well.
Yeah, it is working well. I've just been keeping an eye on the lap times coming in as they're posted, and the rider sitting second at the moment, Senna Agius, is looking pretty, not just on the timesheets, but he's been doing a high number of high 42s and very, very low 1 minute 43s, which is pretty competitive, we would have to say. We said at the start of the session that that would probably be super competitive pace, certainly on the first half of the race on Sunday, if conditions are as they are at the moment. For example, Nani Gonzalez has just gone past and did a mid 1 minute 43, so Agius looking a good deal more comfortable actually than his more experienced teammate as it stands.
Yeah, in the overall picture, Gonzalez currently in 8th place on a 142.8. The top 12 are all in the 42s at the moment, down to Jorge Navarro, who crashed this morning. He's currently in 12th place on a 42.9. And we then have riders all the way down to Colin Vaya, who's in 28th out of our 29 runners, all in the 143s. In fact, down to a 43.5. We've got under 1.2 seconds from first to 28th place at the moment. The only rider who's not within that is the wildcard Eric Fernandez on the 61 FAU55 Boscoscuro. So in terms of our regular Moto2 field, 1.197 seconds covers the lot of them.
Yes, that is pretty crazy as Danny Munoz jumps up into third with the 42.3. Good stuff from the number 17. A couple of names that we have come to expect to be fighting up at the front of the Moto2 field. Just be keeping an eye on their times. It's fair to say, as it stands, Diogo Moreira and David Alonso still have quite some work to do. David Alonso is doing very, very high 1 minute 43s. 43.9 was his last lap time. But then I guess after about 9 or 10 laps, he really does start to come into his own. So let's maybe reserve judgment for a little bit more. Another name, Diogo Moreira, doing very high 43s as well, which is quite some way off the likes of Senna Agius, who is certainly looking fairly strong in the first half of this session.
Yeah, Gonzalez has just done a 43.2 on his most recent lap, so he's got back down into the low 43s, the kind of race pace they were expecting, although we say that might be the race pace in the first half of the Grand Prix, not necessarily the race pace in the latter stages, where we could see riders dropping, well, as many as 2, 3, 4 seconds a lap if they don't treat their tyres properly in the early stages.
That was a very used looking front tyre there on Danny Holgado's bike.
That's 9 laps.
Yeah, that's 9 laps. I'm not sure if that's something he's carried over from FP1 potentially, but certainly not looking completely ideal. Was that front Pirelli? Danny Munoz is spectacular to watch, isn't he, through this final sector off the track. Turns 12 and 13, getting it all out of line and all out of shape. Good value is the young Spaniard. We were saying earlier, it is expected for him to move to Italtrans as a full-time rider next year to replace the Aiko and Diogo Moreira.
He was a bit of a Friday hero last year here, wasn't he? Danny Munoz, he and Jorge Navarro, who were substitute/wild cards here last year, were both up in the top 3 for much of Friday. I think Navarro, if you remember, was fastest of all on Friday here last season. Only a circuit that he goes particularly well in. He was a podium finisher here some 6 years ago. Let's see what Ethan Guevara's been up to through the, well, I guess iconic in many ways, Turn 5, made so by the exploits of the MotoGP world champion Jorge Martin, who was able to get his shoulder along the tarmac. Ethan Guevara perhaps not taking quite so many risks to entertain us at the moment.
He might want to wait another couple of weeks until his hand is fully healed before he starts playing to the crowd, playing to the gallery. Just another lap has come in from Manny Gonzalez, the championship leader. He's just continuing to get faster as this session goes on. Now doing low 1 minute 43s is Manny Gonzalez, so in pretty good nick, you would have to say, at this current moment. Colin Bayer has just improved as well, so decent stuff from the Dutchman. And while we have just a little lull here, Lewis, you know, sometimes I like to throw some trivia your way. I like to put some well, put you on the spot. Your knowledge is very, very fearsome indeed. So let's see if you can get this one. David Alonso won his 14th Moto2 race, which is very impressive to do so in his rookie season. But I believe there are 7 riders that have won a Moto2 race quicker than he has. And I'm saying Moto2 as in going back to 2010.
Right. That's a great question.
Yeah, so can you...
How many did you say there were? 7?
7 riders that have won a Moto2 race quicker than he has in terms of number of races. I'm not talking about duration of time, but the number of races. So
are we also discounting riders who won at the start of 2010 who perhaps had won prior in the Shoei Tomizawa, of course, the much missed Shoei Tomizawa won the first ever Moto2 race back in Qatar 2010. Well, a couple of world champions that spring to mind, I think, would fit that category. I think Pedro Acosta's borderline, but was he just about inside? He won the first half of the season, didn't he, in 2022. Marc Marquez won fairly early. Was it Le Mans back in 2011? He took his first victory. It was definitely very early on in that particular season. To rack my brains now to look back at the others who we've had. Quartararo had been around for a bit longer, hadn't he? Of course, took his first win here back in 2018, but that was his second season in the Moto2 World Championship at that point, so he doesn't particularly fit the bill. Some of our past leading rookies over the season in Moto2
there was one rider that was quite amazing in how fast he adapted and actually won his second race in Kota.
Nico Terol?
No, it wasn't Nico Terol.
Oh, no, it was Maverick Vinales, wasn't it? The year after, who won on the Pons bike. Of course, only did 1 season in Moto2 before he moved straight up into MotoGP. So Maverick Vinales, that takes us to 3. We'll give you a bit of chance to play along at home as well, because
I'll give you another clue. A rider that really took this class by storm. Only spent 1 year in the class before moving up to MotoGP.
See, I was thinking was Raul Fernandez one. I was trying to think, did he win early enough in his career? I guess we are. We're talking about 14 races, aren't we? And 2021 wasn't a particularly long season for obvious reasons in terms of numbers of Grand Prix. I feel like there's going to be one real outlier in there that perhaps we're not expecting, that perhaps won in slightly unusual circumstances in Moto2. I'm trying to think of some of the rain-affected Moto2 Grand Prix that we've had over the years.
There was one that it wasn't a linear kind of start. He joined Moto2 midway through the season and then started performing really remarkably towards the end. Yes, correct.
Alonso Lopez, who of course arrived in Moto2 at the same time as Pedro Acosta. I don't think Fermin Aldeguer went early enough, did he?
No.
Because of course he joined us halfway through a season himself, so he doesn't quite tick that box either. How long had Sam Lowe's been around before he won in Moto2?
Full season.
He'd been around a full season before we finally got that first win in Kota. It's a great quiz question, I've got to say, Neil. It's a wonderful one to have a think of.
Yeah, I'll give you a clue for another name.
How are we missing? We're missing two of them, are we?
You are missing two, yeah. Another name actually happened in the first year of Moto2. It was his first year, though, in the intermediate category, and therefore he counts in this. And obviously, he was up against another rookie, Marc Marquez, in that season. In fact, he wasn't bitten off after some not very intelligent things in 125s. He jumped up into Moto2.
Was that Andrea Ione's rookie season?
Yeah,
I was thinking, I had a view in my mind that Iannone had already been around in the intermediate class for a year prior to that. Clearly, he hadn't been.
Won his fourth race.
Won his fourth Grand Prix
in Moto2.
2010. A season where quite a lot of riders won, in fairness. I was about to try and throw Jules Cluzel forward as an option, but I think he'd also been around for a year prior to his victory in that pretty random 2010 season.
Yeah, Jules was a fairly experienced 250cc rider prior to that first Moto2 campaign. And shall I put you out of your misery?
Go on.
Alex Rins.
Alex Rins just moved up to Moto2 in 2015. And of course, replaced Maverick Vinales, one of the other hotshot rookies that particular team had brought into Moto2. Rins, of course, stayed in Moto3 for that extra year, didn't he, to try and win the championship that he so nearly won in 2013, was beaten to the punch by his teammate Alex Marquez before then moving into Moto2.
Yeah, so just a quick rundown. Maverick Vinales won his second Moto2 race, Ralph Fernandez his third, Marc Marquez and Andrea Iannone both won their fourth, Pedro Acosta won his eighth, Alex Rins his 10th, Alonso Lopez his 12th, and David Alonso his 14th. So shout out to resident statistician TV Room Raccoon for bringing up that to my attention. It is a good one, and well, you almost got there, Lewis. I'll give you 7 out of 8. Not bad.
Not a bad effort. So there are actually still opportunities for, take Colin Via, for instance. He's still got a couple of Grand Prix to do that himself, of course, having missed a couple of rounds already earlier this season at Silverstone and at Aragon. And with the form that he showed to finish up inside the top 6 back in Hungary, strange things certainly have happened than that. Strange things are going on for Diogo Moreira. I have to say, his pace on the run that you're looking at on screen is pretty consistent. Doing a lot of laps there on a high 43 or a low 44. Of course, the missing piece of the information that we've not got there is not only how many laps did he put on his tyres at the end of that run, but just how fast could he continue to be over a full race distance, because that might not necessarily be as fast as the likes of Manu Gonzalez and Senna Regis have been going in this session. They certainly look like the standout too, don't they, in terms of race rhythm, but if he can hold that pace for 21 laps and others can't, then that might well be the best route to victory on Sunday.
Yeah. Another important bit of information that you do have, though, is it's Friday, and therefore we can't properly judge Diogo Moreira, because he is a rider that will certainly gets going when it is Saturday. Qualifying is when we start to see the best of the Brazilian, and yeah, he's shown so often that he does reserve his best. Another rider I think to keep an eye on is potentially this rider here, Joe Roberts. Is down in 17th, but again, just looking at his times, he's been pretty consistent over the last couple of runs.
Just to add to the Diogo Moreira point, take Austria as a very good example, where we didn't see him at all really on Friday until the very last laps of practice on the Friday afternoon, when he jumped himself into the top 14 by the skin of his teeth. And then fast forward 48 hours, he was dominating the Grand Prix and winning it at a relative canter from Danny Holgado. So Roberts is up into 17th place. As you can see on your screens, left-hand side of your screen, he's within 7/10 of a second of the outright fastest lap time, which remains Ethan Guevara, 142.3. We're expecting some fresh tyres to go in the latter stages. Certainly the one rider who looks like he has already thrown a fresh tyre at this is Munoz, who's recently leapt up into 3rd place on a 142.396. The vast majority of the other riders set their best lap of the session on lap 2 or lap 3. Lap 2 basically means your first complete time lap of the session, which applies to Guevara, to Agius, to Arbolino, to Holgado, to Navarro, to Lopez, and to Baltus. Moreira and Huertas too, actually, for the Italtrans team, all set their best laps of this session on their very first time lap, which could also be relevant point to bring into qualifying tomorrow afternoon, in that these tyres quite well could be single lap qualifiers. You're not going to get 2, 3, 4 laps out of these tyres and still be able to improve upon your qualifying time. You're going to have to deliver in your very first attempt.
As we pick up with Joe Roberts in this final sector, down through turn number 13. Speeds it into turn 14, this long, fabulous right-hander which leads onto the front straight. And Roberts is making a bit of a play here for the top 14, the American, losing out quite substantially in that final sector for the second lap in succession. So Joe is qualifying in the last 2 rounds has been a little disappointing. 21st back in Austria, that's just not a great track for Joe Roberts, I think we can conclude. And he never really got on that well with the Barcelona Park either, where he finished down in 19th after qualifying 13th. Roberts struggling to get inside the top 14, and it is now getting to that point in this session where race times, race runs, that's going to put to one side. We'll resume that tomorrow morning, and the focus once again is on setting a fast lap time. Danny Holgado, you would have to say, is probably in a decent position as it stands, 6th place, 42.5. Will we be able to approach those kind of lap times again as this session progresses? We come into the last 5 or 6 minutes. He's not a million miles away as he comes through split number 1.
The key riders certainly to watch in these final 10 minutes. Diogo Moreira 23rd, Aaron Canet 25th. Of course, they are 3rd and 2nd respectively in the World Championship. Fran Gonzalez, your current points leader, not exactly safe as houses in 9th. He's only 10th and a half clear of the potential Q1 danger zone. So I'd say all 3 of the championship contenders at the moment not exactly sitting comfortably. Nor the rider in 4th in the World Championship, Barry Baltus, he's currently in 18th place. Jake Dixon, who's 5th in the championship, is currently in 11th. And Celestino Vietti, who's 6th in the World Championship, is in 13th place. So some potential headaches and some potential heavyweight names find themselves in some choppy waters in the latter stages of this session. 9 minutes to go then as Danny Holgado looks to make his bid to secure a place in qualifying 2. 87 thousandths of a second would actually only move him up a couple of places. He moves up 1 place, 6th into 5th. Just over a 10th of a second now, covering your top 5.
Yeah, crazy close times. Less than 2 tenths covering the top 6 in this session. And Danny Holgado has had a very strong day so far. Topped FP1 this morning and is on course to comfortably qualify for Q2 automatically in this practice session. As we see, 5, 6 names head out. Albert Arenas as well, with his one-off crash helmet designed for his home race. Do expect something from Arenas potentially this weekend. He's getting kicked out of that Gresini team at the end of this year, but this has been his best Moto2 season to date. He's had some of his best, in fact his best Moto2 results so far this season. That 2nd place back at Mugello, and historically this has been a good place for him as well, so expect Arenas to be somewhere towards the front this weekend.
And here's the rider that's replacing him next season, Alonso Lopez, along with Sergio Garcia, who are moving across to the Gresini squad. Sergio Garcia is racing this weekend, but not here. He's over in the World Superbike paddock at Magny Court, debuting on a factory Honda this weekend, keeping himself active ahead of a full-time racing return in this particular class next season. So Lopez then currently in 16th place. This could potentially move him up into the top 6, top 7 if he can hold it into the final sector. Top 4 in fact on a 142.417. So Lopez into now relative safety and pushes his teammate Celestino Vietti now onto the edge of elimination. He sits 14th. Let's follow Holgado, who's approaching the line now. We're not seeing him. Now we are. And it's a 142.219. Fastest lap time of the day, beating himself from this morning.
Yeah, brilliant stuff yet again from Holgado, and we really are not too far away from the outright circuit record in the Moto2 category. That was Sergio Garcia, who managed to do that last year of 41.894. Just over 0.3 of a second away from that lap time now in these stiflingly hot afternoon temperatures. It's quite an impressive lap time for Holgado to do. Looking very strong. We were saying earlier today that Moto2 has offered up brilliant variety so far this year. 8 different race winners in the first 14 races of the season, and quite possibly 2 or 3 names that you would not be surprised to see added to the winners list and tally in the 8 rounds to come. Dani Holgado, I think, would be first and foremost up amongst those names for sure, certainly on the basis of what we've seen today, what we saw in Austria as well just 3 weeks ago.
Harry Baltus will be another one I think that would certainly figure into that conversation. Chancellor Vietti too. Surely his day will come at some stage this season on board that Boscoscuro, of which he will be staying on, we think, for next season. The strong rumours in the paddock is that Luca Lunetta will be his teammate at the Speed RS team. He was originally linked with the Gresini squad. Of course, we now know that he won't be heading there, as Dani Munoz continues to impress on this Friday afternoon in Barcelona. He's another rider who we're expecting to be on this grid full-time next season, and Munoz now moves up into 2nd place.
Yeah, really impressive stuff from the number 17, showing that he is deserving of a spot in this World Championship, as another couple of names jump up. Colin Bayer making it an IO 2-3 in this particular session, and showing that what we saw in Hungary was absolutely no fluke whatsoever, but now a real flurry of fast lap times. So Jake Dixon goes 2nd, Albert Arenas up into 11th, and more fast laps to come. Yeah,
we've got a quintet of Boscoscoros who are all together on the racetrack. Ortola, Dixon, Salach, Eric Fernandez, who's the wild card, and Unai Radre went also out with them on the second of the MSI bikes. So it's now Holgado, Dixon, Vaya, Munoz, Ortola, Guevara. Your early leader is now 6th. Aegis, Lopez, Salach, Arbolino, Arenas, Ramirez. Gonzalez is now 13th, the World Championship leader, with Morera and Kinet 26th and 27th. Moto2's been turned upside down today.
Well, certainly has. What to say about Aaron Kinet? He's just exited the pit lane. He's on his out lap as it stands, but he has a massive amount of work to do to prevent this day turning into a bit of a crisis. Another rider with a lot to do is on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You can see Diogo Moreira, 26th as it stands.
0.15 up the pace halfway around it. It's saying estimated P20. That's how close Moto2 is. The margins are so fine, you can't afford to give away 1,000th or 100th of a second around this place, because you're going to drop way down the order. 0.3 of a second down now Moreira is, which is saying projected 17th place. That would not cut the mustard from Moreira's point of view. We're following Alonso too, who's having to try and rescue his Friday after not particularly figuring much so far today. Only up into 19th place. What about Baltus? 14th place at the moment, up into 9th.
Yeah, not bad from Baltus there. Let's see what Moreira can do as he comes out of the final corner. You can see just at the top of your screen, we go on board with him as he crosses the finish line. Moreira does the job for the moment in 11th. Decent stuff from him.
And Manu Gonzalez is now back to 16th place. He is improving though. He is setting personal best sector times. Vietti's had some sort of problem out of the final quarter, so he stays down in 18th place. We're waiting for the World Championship leader to appear on the main straight to get himself back out of the Q1 lap times where he's been once previously this season. Gonzalez now back into 7th place, just ahead of his teammate.
Yeah, that's a sign of a rider that is destined to win the championship, isn't it? Any possible drama is just kind of alleviated almost immediately, and we've not had too many situations on too many days this year when we've thought Manu Gonzalez is in a bit of trouble here. Maybe a little hint that he might be, but as soon as we suggested it, he goes and puts it back inside the top 7. So decent stuff from Gonzalez, and he's just set a red first sector on his latest lap time. Just incidentally, going back to Vietti, he was actually, I think, 0.3 off coming through this final sector. And his final turn is he has a massive front end moment through turn 14. No wonder he was shaking his head coming out of that final turn. Very, very lucky indeed to stay on.
Yeah, keeping an eye on Aaron Kinet's sector times. He's on a pretty good lap at the moment. We're now right on board with the 44. 27th at the moment. The only runners behind him are the Inabitsu Honda Team Asia pair of Yuki Kuni and Mario Aggi, who's making his return to action this weekend. This should, though, rocket Kinet somewhere near where we'd expect him to be on a Friday. He's now 28th, second last. What's he about to change that to as he goes across the line? Fastest of all, Aaron Kinet's turned it around.
Yeah. just like we saw Saturday morning in Hungary. He was absolutely nowhere for the majority of the session, and then right at the end, jumped straight up.
28th up to first.
Impressive stuff from Canet, impressive stuff from Diogo Moreira, who's just jumped up into 5th, so it's been a decent late salvage from the Brazilian as well. There's a yellow flag out in sector 1. We know it's not Jake Dixon. There is a crasher down at turn number 1. Is it one of the IO bikes potentially? One of the orange dots on that track map is stationary as it stands.
And you just saw the yellow flag fluttering in the foreground there as Ethan Guevara made his way into turn 1. And boy, did Aaron Canet just sneak under the door in time there, because of course those yellow flags would have cancelled his next lap. It is an IO bike. It's Colin Vaya who's gone down. Very easy to distinguish him from Danny Munoz with the plain black crash helmet that he's running this weekend, and Vaya with that one is 6th, so his place, not a crash we understand, we believe it's some sort of mechanical problem that's forced him to park it in the gravel chat. But 6th place for Colin Vaya leaves him relatively well, it certainly was a crash, because you could see him sliding into view there. Our information in our headsets was that he hadn't. We can confirm to you that he has, but he's safe enough anyway. 6th place for Vaya. So which of the riders who have now been shuffled back? Arenas back to 15th place. Ramirez and Roberts for American Racing 16th and 17th. Roberts set to change that, but I'd be surprised if he didn't go through those yellow flags, because they've been out for a couple of minutes now.
I would be surprised. Roberts has got a decent gauge just up ahead of him in David Alonso. Roberts does go into 8th. Let's see if this lap time will stand. We're seeing a couple of lap times come up on our screens as cancelled. Danny Munoz's latest lap time, for example, is one of them. The yellow flag still out in sector number 1 as Marshall's clear Colin Vaya's machine. So that could well be it for the rest of this session, actually. As you can see, just 20 seconds remaining. And of all the riders outside the top 14 currently, it's the name that was the fastest of the lot last time we went racing on Sunday 2 weeks ago. David Alonso, who is the big casualty, currently down in 23rd and just hasn't quite got his head around this circuit to Barcelona-Catalunya on the Moto2 machine so far.
It's been curious, hasn't it, from Alonso, and any hope of him improving late on, even if he had the speed to do so, has certainly been quashed with the yellow flags that were out at the start of the lap. They have now been cleared, but because of that, no one's been able to improve in that first sector, so it would certainly appear as if that is your lot for a Friday afternoon in Barcelona. And a bit of a difficult Friday to read, wasn't it, in many respects? If you look at the outright sort of race rhythm that we saw through the first 25-30 minutes, you'd perhaps suggest that over race runs, the riders in 10th and 11th might well be in the best shape. The intact duo of Manu Gonzalez and Senna Agius. Gonzalez only made it through by a 10th and a half in 10th place. Agius on near an identical time in 11th place. And the two riders chasing Gonzalez in the World Championship, Canet quickest of all, Moreira 5th, but I feel like we're asking more questions about them than we are about Manu Gonzalez.
Yeah, Canet down in 26th before he put that fastest lap time of the session in, and Moreira spent a good chunk of this session outside the top 20 as well. So, as you said, quite difficult to read where the times are at, where everyone in this Moto2 field is that. We're just hearing in our headsets that anyone that has improved in the last couple of minutes in this session will have their lap times cancelled for taking the yellow flag, and I think Joe Roberts is probably going to be the biggest casualty of that, Lewis. He jumped up into 8th late on, but if what we're being told in our headset is true, it sounds as if the American will lose that lap time and will be demoted back outside the top 14.
Tony Arbolino will certainly be hoping so, because he's in 15th place then on a 1:42.544, less than 0.3 of a second, covered the top 14. Absolutely cutthroat, wasn't it, this afternoon in the intermediate class? And as is always the case, it's unavoidable given how many big names there are in Moto2 these days, but some surprise names sitting outside the top 14. Arenas, podium finisher here in the past, 16th. Vietti, winner here back in 2022, 20th. And winner 2 weeks ago, David Alonso, 23rd place. Boy, has it turned around in the space of 2 weeks from his point of view. Perhaps the shortfalls that he's been describing, his issues getting the best out of brand new tyres, perhaps rearing their ugly head again for Alonso, whose race pace didn't exactly look uncompetitive when we were watching his longer run. be able to do much with it from way down the field if he doesn't get through Q1 tomorrow afternoon. So certainly all sorts of questions, and the lap-by-lap analysis at the end of this Moto2 session is going to make a fascinating reading.
Yeah, no prizes for guessing what we'll be doing later this evening, Lewis. Going through those laps and bringing you a bit of a summary of what we've concluded. Hopefully after speaking to some of the riders as well. At the end of play, we'll be back again tomorrow morning, of course, ahead of a jam-packed Super Saturday of action, which will include the Tissot Sprint for MotoGP, 3 p.m. local time, as well as 2 Moto E races too. So you will not want to miss the action on Saturday. But before that, we have a very important MotoGP practice session coming up. Matt Burt has just raced Victor last time out, but outside the top 14, he's going into Q1 tomorrow.
Aaron Canet looked like he was going to join in for much of that session, but he was able to recover it. A 1:42.168 for Canet sees him top day one, but that doesn't really tell the story in the end. Daniel Holgado quickest this morning, second in the afternoon. I think Gonzalez, 10% of Aegis 11, probably looked the strongest over longer runs, but only just scraped through in the end to Q2. Diogo Moreira, another rider who was way down the order early on, but managed to salvage 5th. David Alonso, perhaps the biggest surprise of day one, only managing 23rd. Aaron Canet quickest on this Friday in Barcelona. MotoGP will get set for their crucial 60-minute practice session in moments. Stay with us.
First on the calendar in 1992 and close to bustling Barcelona with its beautiful architecture, beaches and iconic landmarks, sits the magnificent Montmello track within touching distance of the Mediterranean coast. It's Marc Marquez currently riding the crest of a wave as he chases an 8th successive double win in 2025. Crucial Q2 places are at stake next live. It's time for MotoGP. 4.66 kilometres, 2.89 miles, 14 corners, 8